Hello and welcome back to Heard and Seen. Now I don't know about you, but I've been really missing live music, and I think it's going to be a little while yet before we get to see some. So I've been spending a lot of time looking at live albums that I've already got, and trying to find some that I haven't heard before. So I was going to share my findings with you today, and also ask you what your favourite live albums are. They're a very personal thing. We have our favourite bands. Some of them are linked to memories. Some of them are where it's a band we always wish we'd gotten to see before they broke up or what have you. So it's a interesting subject. But today I'm going to start with a new live album that has come out in a very timely fashion into this vacuum of live music. The Teskey Brothers have just recently released Live at the Forum on traditional double live album, recorded over a few nights at Melbourne's magnificent Forum Theatre. Now, I've been following this band for a few years, first seeing them a few years ago in a record store day in our local record shop stroke bookstore in front of about 20 people, including my mum. You know, it was a very intimate performance, and they've really come a long way since then. They've been touring the world. They've released a couple of self-recorded albums, all recorded analog, the old school way. They've been building up a following, and this is a bit of, I suppose, a homecoming for them. 4 nights at this particular theatre is definitely a landmark, and they've wheeled in an analog tape machine and recording gear and recorded it all analog onto a double live album. So this is a fantastic live album, and I thought I'd use this as a bit of an example of what makes a great live album. So here we go. So this particular album, it really captures the essence of being there. So I was lucky to attend one of the nights, and you really get a sense of being in the room, the audience participation, and they do a really great renditions of their songs. But they also take them to new places as well. So you get to start to see the band jam a little bit and feed off the energy of the crowd. And I think those are really the main things that make a good live album. But the net result has to be listenable at home. You know, when you take it home, put it on the turntable, and without all the visuals and the volume of the actual band on stage, does it involve you? Is it an enjoyable listen? And this is a resounding yes. My daughter actually said, I didn't quite get them with the studio albums, but I really get it now, having heard this. So, great live album. What excites me about this one, it's early in their sort of professional career, if you like, and you can hear all sorts of areas that they could really, I suppose, up the ante. So I think we're only just starting to hear the best of the Teskey Brothers. There's a lot more to come from these guys. Love to hear some gospel singers doing backup vocals for the Teskey Brothers. It'd be magnificent. But highly recommend it. Actually, the #1 album in Australia over the last week or so. So that must tell you something about how much people are missing live music. So let's start off in the 60s. And in the 60s, I think the British bands, so the Beatles, the Stones, and the Yardbirds and so forth, were all learning their craft, and the art of the live album perhaps they hadn't quite learnt yet, and a lot of them just suffered from screaming teenagers. So the best live albums from the 60s that I've found have been from those established or black blues, soul, funk artists that had been plying their trade around the live circuit in the US for some time, and really had perfected the art of working up a storm in the crowd. So there's a few that I found so far that really are outstanding. The first in the blues field would be B.B. King live at the Regal. The Regal Theatre apparently has this amazing reputation for intimacy and connection to the crowd, and that really comes through on this album. It's a well-recorded album, sounds magnificent, and B.B. King just really at one with his home crowd. Another one that really impressed me was Otis Redding live in Europe. Oh, that man really knows how to work up a crowd as well. Just fantastic vocal performance. One of the all-time great singers, and a really tight band behind him on that one as well. So that's another fantastic one, but probably the outstanding album from that era that many think is one of the best albums of all time would have to be James Brown at the Apollo in Harlem, and quite outstanding, the energy that man creates. And I suppose he was the archetypal showman that so many showmen sort of learned a lot from, particularly Mick Jagger later on. So those are definitely three that are going on my shopping list. There is one other which people seem to holler on about. What about Sam Cooke live at Harlem Square? Well, I haven't heard that one yet, but I do like a bit of Sam Cooke, so I'll be looking at that one as well. So let's move into the 70s, and there's a few changes taking place between those great albums of the 60s and the 70s. The tours were getting bigger, the venues were getting bigger, there were perhaps more bands with perhaps more virtuoso musicians or coming to the fore, so maybe a band was more guitar led than vocal led. So definitely a bit of a shift. And another advent was the introduction of the mobile recording studio. So people were starting to get out the back of trucks with a desk and a couple of tape machines, and all they had to do was pull up outside the venue, run some cables in and double mic the band. So the ability to record definitely improved, and better separation, better I suppose flexibility in how they recorded a band. Certainly we started to see a change in the live music. Perhaps they're less tight and a little bit more self-indulgent, a little bit more soloing creeping in, sometimes a lot of soloing creeping in. The dreaded drum solo reared its head. Now sometimes these things work really, really well, but sometimes you definitely got the impression that the band was having more fun than the audience. So a double-edged sword. Some people like it, some people don't. I think it made for a greater variety of live albums. So what were the great albums of the 70s in terms of live music? Well, I think one of the great live albums would have to be the Rolling Stones' Get Your Ya-Ya's Out. They were a very unpredictable band, I think, in terms of quality, the Stones through the 70s. But Get Your Ya-Ya's Out really got them on a good night. And you can really hear and start to sort of see how Mick Jagger had learnt from James Brown and working the crowd. And that was a really good album. But there is actually a slightly better one from that Mick Taylor era of Stones, which is called Brussels Affair. Now, if you were to get that on vinyl, you're probably looking at 4 figures, but you can get it on MP3 downloaded, I think, from the Stones website, and that one's really, really worth seeking out. I think it's better than the Get Your Ya-Ya's Out, so that's a really good one. Another album that also gets a lot of praise is The Who live at Leeds, which I've never really listened to much before, but have been listening to a little bit just recently. And that one is just quite dangerously unhinged, I think is perhaps a good word, and very explosive. You've got Keith Moon at his absolute best, and he really shows through on this album. Now, the original album is actually only the tail end of the set. It was actually on the Tommy tour that this was recorded. I think they recorded quite a few nights of that tour, but then Pete Townsend got rather daunted by the sheer volume of recordings that he had to sort through, and ordered them all burnt. So they recorded 2 more nights at one at Hull, I think, and one at Leeds. So interesting story, and I think Pete Townsend probably regrets that decision. But you can actually also get the full set on a triple vinyl set, which has all the Tommy stuff as well. Well worth seeking out. Very explosive album, absolutely fantastic stuff. If you're looking at Southern rock, you might be looking at Little Feat, Waiting for Columbus, which you'll see behind me. The Allman Brothers live at Fillmore East is another legendary one. Leon Russell, that's a fantastic sort of Southern rock soul album. He always has fantastic horn sections and arrangements on his, and that's a fantastic one. There is one that a friend of mine mentioned to me I need to check out, which I haven't as yet, which is Mad Dogs and Englishmen by Joe Cocker. And that one's linked very closely to Leon Russell, because Leon Russell was the musical director. But I think there was something like 36 musicians on stage on that one, which sounds quite crazy, but apparently it works really well. But I'll find out for myself when I check that one out. The biggest album, live album of the 70s would have to be Peter Frampton. Frampton Comes Alive, which is remarkable really in that he'd done pretty well with Humble Pie and some of those sorts of bands and had a little bit of solo success, but it's actually his live album that gave him the big career breakthrough, and I think it's probably the biggest selling live album from the 70s, and actually had 3 hit singles released from the live album. Like Baby I Love Your Way is probably being the most famous. In the soul field, probably Bill Withers live at Carnegie Hall, remarkable. That's a really terrific performance, and he also manages to maintain a lot of interaction with the crowd and great intimacy. That's a fantastic album, and you can get some really nice editions of that on vinyl. Heavy rock. Now, I'll do a little section on heavy rock in a little while, but with heavy rock there's a great deal of pride in their live performance. A lot of those heavy rock bands always sort of like to say we live to play live, and I think that's really where they get their energy from, and they can take things to another level and they're not constrained by the limit of a studio album. And one of the great ones from the 70s is definitely considered to be Thin Lizzy Live and Dangerous. Again, perhaps not my favourite band, but I certainly respect them, and they had amazing energy, and that really captures them on form. But probably the heavy rock album with the biggest reputation from that era would have to be Deep Purple, Made in Japan, recorded by the classic sort of Ian Gillan and Roger Glover lineup over 4 nights in Japan. It really captures them at an absolute peak. And they knew how to improvise but keep everything energised and tight and together. The call and response between the different instruments, in particular Ritchie Blackmore, John Lord, the keyboard player, and Ian Gillan, the singer, is really quite remarkable, particularly on the song Strange Kind of Woman. It's incredible. So that one really gets a balance between maintaining structure of song, keeping it engaging, keeping it lively, and taking everything to another level. So that one's absolutely right up there, definitely worth checking out. But there is a notable omission here. What about Led Zeppelin? You hear me say they were the biggest band of the 70s. Yes, they were, but they didn't do a great live album in the 70s. They did The Song Remains the Same, which I don't think really got them at their best. I think they only really released a great live album years later, or much more recently, when Jimmy Page has been going through their archives and dug out some really fantastic recordings. So I've got a DVD here which captures a number of different tours, and it is really quite fantastic. And it has been digitally restored. A lot of the old footage from around the world has been lovingly compiled onto this DVD, so this is well worth checking out. But there is a live album called How the West Was Won, which I need to hear of theirs, and that one is meant to be really superb. So that's one that's definitely on my to listen to list. And Deep Purple, the next version of Deep Purple, which had David Coverdale, later of Whitesnake, and Glenn Hughes on live at the California Jam from 1974. This one is also a fantastic DVD. Captures a very angry performance from Deep Purple, certainly from Ritchie Blackmore, who got quite fed up with one of the camera crew getting a bit too close, and subsequently jammed his guitar through its lens. So a nice little piece of work from Ritchie Blackmore, temperamental at best, but a fantastic, lively performance in front of about 300,000 people or something, so huge. That one is well worth checking out, and both those DVDs show the best of the 1970s hard rock bands at their best.